I'm going to sort of ask some questions that I have, and then we'll open it up to the audience for a bit of a dialogue. But if there's something that you're dying to know in this, just raise your hand, and we can, we're moving towards the end of the festival, so it's a little bit more relaxed, I think. So I think one of the things interesting about animation is that the size of the studio can really make the job very different when you're in production or as a producer. And I also think the idea of being a producer sort of seems to be very elusive. Like, what does that job entail? It depends on where you're working. So I would love to hear from each of you. This is really loud. Sorry. Just about how your work environment influences your job on a daily basis. And like, if you're describing your job to people who don't know what you do, what's like the one sentence that you say as a producer that you do? So Kaydee, do you want to start about the difference, sort of small and large studios, and then how do you describe what you do?
Okay, so when I started at Polycat, we were around 10 people in the studio. We have in about a year grown to 20 plus, and that's excluding a team of 18 outsourced animators that I manage. And that it's been challenging in the sense that there's more people to keep your eye on, but it's also made other things a lot easier because there's more people to take up the workload. So it's kind of changed the format, but then it's like brought its own kind of pluses and challenges. What I do, that's a difficult one. I do a lot. So it's basically, what I do is project management and client services. It's just working with people, essentially. Yeah, studio people and clients.
When people ask me what I do, I tend to tell them that I herd cats and that I get really excited about spreadsheets, and that is my life. I think my parents still don't really know what I do, but yeah, project manager, HR, therapist, like slave driver, we do a lot. But in terms of managing sizes, so my background is in live action. And the closest you can kind of get in live action is being a post-producer, which is what I was. And when I was a post-producer, I think the biggest size team I had was probably a team of about 10 or 12. It was VFX and editors that I was working with in post. And that was big, and I was running around and I was doing everything, engaging with the artists, engaging with the clients, engaging with the directors. And then when I moved to Cape Town, I started working at Triggerfish. And they hired me as a line producer. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And I joined, and there was a production manager and 3 production coordinators. And I thought, what am I going to do with all of these production people? I've never worked with such a big production team in my life. What are we all going to do? And then I saw, on the shorts, we have about, at our max, about 60 people. On the feature film, at our max, we had about 150 people. And that's when I realized that my production team on the feature, I had a line producer, 3 production managers, and 4 production managers and 4 coordinators, and that felt thin. So it shows how much we have to do. I find as I've moved from those smaller, intimate teams, I'm much less involved with artists on the floor, and that was a shock for me when I started in animation. I really missed being involved with the artists, but what I learned is then, because I had a bigger production team, those became my team and my babies, and that interaction that I used to get from supporting the artist became supporting the other producers that I work with.
And I must say, Okaya does a fantastic job at supporting the other producers that she works with. I fondly refer to her, under the current circumstances of the project that we have in common, I fondly refer to Kaya as my production Oprah, because it's not every day as a producer that you have the opportunity to have a weekly check-in with another producer and just talk about your production, the things that you might be concerned about or things that's on your mind. Whether they're actionable or not, it's a rare privilege. So I just want to do that shout out, and maybe that's revealing of some of the experiences you might have as a producer as well, depending on where you work. So the studio I currently work with is Lucan, and we're a small team. Our internal headcount is about 15, but at any given moment we have a range of freelancers or freelance collaborators spread across the world. At the moment, I think our entire team count is around 30 to 35, all-encompassing. And I spent some time last night trying to do the one-sentence answer to what do producers actually do. And in my context, where I do work with a smaller studio, sometimes we're project managers, we're process managers, we're bookkeepers, we're HR. Sometimes you just need to be a friend. Sometimes you do conflict resolution. I like saying that, well, if you want to produce, you have to assume the role and the mindset of helping where help is needed. You're not the boss. You're usually just a really important conduit within a team, and I think that's such a common misconception. Doesn't matter how big your studio or your team is. And I like to think of the role almost as a guardrail or training wheels in a bicycle sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Please.
Because we're explaining all the things we do, but maybe I can just give some, why do we do this? Why do our jobs exist? And at the end of the day, we are tasked with delivering projects on time and on budget. And so that is why we are doing all of these process management, people management, sometimes being a friend, sometimes doing accounting, sometimes doing reporting, because at the end of the day, we have the bird's eye view and the oversight of making sure that the artists can be artists and they're just focused on something that is manageable and it comes out, and that we're working as efficiently as possible. And that is, I think what a producer does, because at the end of the day, we're the ones reporting to the clients, which is why we're also often quite stressed out and sometimes a little bit highly strung, because, you miss a deadline today, thankfully, we've already accounted for that. But if our deadlines start getting missed, people start really getting upset.
those are all great answers. Yeah, it's a very, there's a lot of lack of transparency around what happens in the production management track, and how to do it well. So when we're trying to train the next generation of great producers and coordinators and production managers, it's hard to quantify what our day-to-day jobs are. So thank you guys. So if you've been here over the weekend, you know that my passion is really around how we change the demographics in the film industry and have more women, more folks of color, more marginalized folks. And I think one of the things that can happen in producing, and we talked about this when we met earlier, is that producers or production managers get the sort of stereotyper of being the mom or the nanny, and so how do we break that and and really yet it is a job that often sometimes women gravitate toward. So I guess how do we break those stereotypes, and do you guys feel that being a producer is a personality type?
I think personality can definitely play a role in terms of being able to work with people, because people is at the heart of what we do. If we don't have people in the studio, we don't have work to deliver. If we don't have people on the other end as clients, if we can't deal with them, we don't have money in the studio. So I think in that terms, yes, personality is a big deal, and those so-called soft skills are essential, but they shouldn't be called soft skills, right? More like essential skills. Then what was the...
So how do we break this sort of stereotype
Yes,
of
of being the mom?
and the mom?
I think the reason people probably call it a mom is because it's like authoritative managerial situation, but then also there is a bit more understanding into it, but then they misconstrue that with their only reference, which is probably a motherly figure, which is wrong. But I think it's because more women need to come into positions of management and be seen in positions of power, where it's not just the head of a family. No, we're heads of businesses, we're heads of projects, we're managers. So because you never say that your boss is your dad. So why, if the boss is a female, the manager is a female, why is she all of a sudden the mom? So
I'm going to come back to the first part of the question because I can't remember it now, but I can remember the second part of the question. So, I do think it's, we're always, as producers, it's sort of like, how can I help you get your work done? What do you need? How can I support you? And then that becomes very much a mom role. And as a female, you're seen as a nurturer. And I remember in the industry looking around, especially in live action, and seeing, very male-dominated, except when it came to production teams, and wondering, is that because we are people's, moms? And I think asides, what I've noticed about myself is I swear a lot. And I think I do that to try and break that, mommy sense. Get your shit together. But also just putting in boundaries and showing that my job isn't here to nurture you. My job is here, you are an adult. I am an adult. This is an adult relationship. And we are working together to deliver something that we are getting paid for. And I've found as I've progressed in my career, that's become more and more important because I very easily fall into the mommy role and I want to look after everybody and I want everybody to be happy and I want to nurture everyone. And I think, when I moved into animation, I don't have the capacity to mommy 150 people. I'm going to do a bad job and they're going to get resentful. So I think one of the most important things is having a team where you actually equipping them with the skills and teaching them the autonomy to be grown-ups so that they don't need to be mothered. Because that's not our job. Our job is not just being there for you. We are responding to clients. We're managing all of these things. And so I really worked hard at equipping my teams to be less dependent on their production and not see their production in that role of mommying, but rather as a support. We're working together. We are cogs in a machine, and I do my job, you do your job, and we get something done. And then what was your second? Oh, is it a personality? Okay, that's 100% a personality type. I say this all the time. I can spot producers in a crowd a mile away. And you learn the language. It's very easy to train a producer with a producer's personality type. And they can move from being a project manager or managing an oil rig or working at a bank or I do find it a very specific personality type. It's quite an anxious personality type, I think, which is why we are at forecasting. We want to know what is going to go wrong potentially. Do we have a plan for it? And that's how we sleep at night. You get excited about planning things. You get joy from spreadsheets and color coding. And I can see it. I do think that it's a personality type, absolutely.
Sure. First part of the question, we're in 2021. I want to say this super loudly. There is no space in the workforce or in the workplace for gender-based stereotypes anymore. If I draw on my own experiences, some of the bad ones that I've had as a female producer is I've been referred to as a artist secretary, mom, PA. I can think of a lot of them, but I fundamentally agree with both Kaydee and Kaya that ultimately it's about setting healthy boundaries. Personally, for me, I'm a huge Brené Brown fan, and she preaches the good word on vulnerability in the workplace. And the way I sort of try and deal with that within my, at least, home team, not freelancers, I honestly don't have time. But in my home team, for me, it's super important, especially with the men in the office, to be vulnerable and honest and say, you know what, as a woman, it makes me feel incredibly saddened or embarrassed or, whatever it is that I might be feeling. And I try and explain that in a way that hopefully promotes empathy. Because at the end of the day, that's what that's about. It is an issue sometimes, and yeah, I mean, I so fondly say this loud and proud that at the end of the day, we're colleagues and we're all adults and we have to meet each other there and through the lens of our context, and that might be the business, perhaps a specific project. But yeah, I think honesty and vulnerability, at least from our side, that's part of our responsibility as women. And for the men in the room, I just want to ask you to listen and be willing to listen. And then is it a personality type thing? Oh, geez. Yes, definitely. Because at the end of the day, you can definitely teach someone the basic skills of, the functions that we perform. But I think all the producers that I've always sort of admired or looked up to, I always admired the thing that's intangible, and that's often just how they go about it. And it's the producer tick, exactly. And unfortunately, I think Kaya's completely correct. Like, that thing can't necessarily be taught. So yes, I think it's a personality type. I can't describe exactly what it is, but there is something about it, definitely.
Great, thanks guys. Building off of that, and these are actually like not the questions I had planned, but I'm much more interested in what we're just talking about. We'll get to the other questions, and then I'll get to your questions as well. But I really appreciate, Kaydee, that when you said like soft skills, which are really essential skills, because if we're looking at how to bring up the next generation of folks in the production pipeline, how some of those essential skills, we do have to figure out how to quantify them. Like, it is nice to say, oh, I can spot a producer a mile away. And I think we all can do that and have been there. But there's also the people that you're like, I think they could have it if I could tell them what it is that I don't know how to articulate. So one of the things that I always think is really important with, as a producer and with my staff, is you have to have authority, but also you have to be able to fade into the woodwork, because sometimes the stuff that you find out is the most important, that a change is going to happen in production or how you're going to predict things, is when you're real quiet in the room and everyone forgets that you're there. Because if they forget that the producer's there, who might talk about budget or timeline or schedule or something, they might not give you all the information. And how do you teach someone to have a presence and be invisible, right? So I think if we could just brainstorm for a second, how could we quantify some of these essential skills on the spot without me giving you any preparation for that? Sorry.
Okay.
Or in the audience, if you people want to be producers, what would you say are the things that you would like to, that you do spot, or that you want them to know?
You want to go?
If somebody else has it.
So I feel something that I've found is very important for my role is emotional intelligence, having a high EQ, being able to read people and kind of read the room. And then also, when I first started as a producer, the studio had never had a producer before, and everyone who had worked with producers had worked with not the most favorable producers, so their experiences weren't good. So I went into a very challenging role where I was essentially not wanted, but very much needed. So I had to kind of step back and learn and get to know my team and build their trust. And then now that we have a great relationship and we have trust, now it works fantastically. So I think it was that. It's being able to read people and know when you can put pressure, when you need to step back, and just being able to kind of read the room and know when, where you should step in.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to answer the question or just go on a tangent, but exactly what you were saying about reading the room, it's been one of the more challenging things for me in working remotely. We, in this pandemic, were really blessed in that we actually transitioned to working remotely quite easily. And because we hadn't been working remotely at the beginning of that project, there was already established relationships, and it was quite easy to move into a remote space. And the main thing that I missed, because I found people were efficient, I didn't have to sit in traffic, I got so much work done, it was fantastic. But I really missed that interaction of I'm going and making a cup of coffee and someone's having a conversation in the kitchen and I'm like, I better check in on that, you know, or I'm walking through a studio and someone's looking really stressed out and I'm like, let me just check that that department's okay. Is something on fire? And I say now, like I used to be able to preempt when something was going to be on fire. Now if stuff comes to me, it's like it is burning. It is really on fire. But I have learned, you know, there's been ways where I've learned to kind of read the room remotely now and read a Zoom room. And now what I'm struggling with the most is teaching soft skills to producers, because I honestly believe that those soft skills come from the exposure. So often when I've trained people, I've been like, just follow me around. Like, take a notepad and make notes of everything, but listen to every single conversation that I have, be in every single meeting that I'm in, listen to me on the phone, listen to that, because you will start picking up how to engage, where, you know, and then people will say to me, how did you know that this was going to be an issue? Or how did you know that this person was struggling? And that's where those kind of soft skills come in, and they overhear the conversation, because that's how I learned, right? By putting myself in the room and going, let me just be in the room, finding somebody that I'm like, I want to learn from you, and not going, can you please teach me, but just making sure I stuck next to that person all the time so I could hear what they were doing and see what they were doing. And we do need to figure out how to transfer that level of knowledge in a remote, because that's where the soft skills to me come in, is like, how do I transfer that stuff that's almost intangible to somebody if they're not sitting in an office with me all the time. And so now I'm just be in every single meeting that I'm in on Zoom, but it's so easy to check out of a meeting in Zoom, right? I mean, I do it all the time. It's why I get stuff done, because I can just multitask.
I think from a more sort of personality point of view, the skills that I generally, the sort of skills that I generally keep an eye out for would be, is this person someone who has an innate sense of responsibility and accountability? I find that's a difficult thing sometimes to teach. So for me, that's quite a natural inclination. And I also want to say this, especially for younger members in the room, you get to know yourself so incredibly well on the course of your career. You don't have to have it figured out right now at 20, because you're going to feel differently and see life so differently a year later in any case. So I'd say all of this with a pinch of salt, but accountability and responsibility, definitely EQ, no doubt. I think Kaya and I had a brief conversation about this once. Like, when you work with highly creative people, i.e. sometimes highly intelligent people, you're also going to be posed with a very broad neurological spectrum of people. And you've got to be okay and sensitive towards that and figure out what's the best way, as an example of on the job, how EQ also comes to play, how to best deal with that and make that work within your team, within your little family. As a personality type, I personally think you need to be a very fair and ethical person. You have to be quite straight-laced, because you are often confronted with things that might be challenging according to your own set of values. So I think that self-awareness there is huge. You're going to have to be quite comfortable with being both proactive and reactive at the same time. You've got to be quite comfortable with crisis management and high-stress situations, and also dealing with people who are highly stressed and perhaps not the most eloquent version of themselves under the circumstances. And I think you need to be able to distance yourself from that, professionally and personally. And then fundamentally for me, I believe in leading by example. If I expect you to be, say, punctual and transparent and be a good communicator, then God knows I've got to keep myself accountable to that as well. But I think that also ties back into accountability, right? And then a more sort of on the job, just a practical thing. If you're someone who's completely comfortable with the idea of working according to checklists, you're going to be just fine, because that way we... Yeah, because that way we can bake a recipe of at least the master grand steps that you will go through on every single job. And I haven't thought about this before, but to answer your question, that's one of the starting points in my mind for potentially training the next set of producers. We've got to go, like, well, in our business and in our framework, and sometimes it is quite universal, whether you're working in 3D live action or 2D hybrid, whatever you're doing, you're always going to start with your brief, and how do we unpack a brief? What are we looking out for? How do we cost that? How does that affect our team? Can our traffic handle it? And that is teachable.
So I think something to take out of that is like good communication skills, like being organized, working well under pressure, and then being able to communicate well with your clients, with your team members, with each other. Yeah.
I've had this conversation a couple of times of the more experience I got. When I started out being a producer, I thought that experience meant that I could foresee every potential problem and, then have like a flawless project, which would never have a problem.
Experience didn't make you a psychic? Is that why?
Yeah, I was like, I will see the future. And then realized that, no, I couldn't do that. Where the experience came in was my confidence in my ability to, and I think it was Kia who said she hates this word now, so sorry, but pivots. Oh, was it? Yeah, sorry, Esther, but and that's what I realized. Like, I'm never gonna be able to foresee everything that can go wrong on a project. Like, I didn't know we were gonna have to produce in a pandemic. Let me tell you. But the ability to just go, and it also comes like in live action, because something blows up on set, and do you fix? And I mean, Di had a beautiful moment of it where there was a technical issue, and she WhatsApp called the speaker and put this microphone under and the camera on her phone, and I was like, that is a producer. You make a plan, and that ability to have the confidence in yourself to know that you're not going to be able to foresee everything, but when stuff does come up, you're going to be able to pivot, and you're going to be able to deal with it. And that's where the kind of confidence, and so that's why also teaching people that is like the flexibility. And yes, it's super important to have a plan. It's super important to be organized, but things are never going to go according to plan. So you've got to pivot.
And yeah, adaptable and be agile. I mean, certainly if the past year and a half has taught us anything, I think that's, and then to have an ABC and not take up everybody's time. You can't overthink it, right? Like, like if I have a production underling and they're like, well, what about this or what about that? I'm like, what are we doing? Like, you have that conversation in your own head and then come to me with where we're going. We can always move. We can always go the other way. The thing I feel like I'm hearing from all of you guys, and I just want to echo this to see if it sounds right to you guys as well, is, when I think about what you're all saying, it makes the jobs in production actually very, very challenging, because we're in creative environments where the teams that we're working with that are not they have a different set of standards, and creativity can't necessarily happen on a timeline, and they're often in wildly creative environments that can be easily distracting, and yet if you have a younger person that you're mentoring coming up or that's working with you, you're like, yeah, I mean, at least Pixar, yeah, that's a ping pong table. You're not going to get to use that. Like that, yes, that's the cereal room. See it now. But that's difficult. Like, that feels like, that there's two sets of standards. And when I was younger, that felt annoying to me. But as I've matured through it, I was like, no, it's a different job. Does that echo with you guys, with like your creative environments around like how you guys were kind of in parallel to a completely different job?
I walked into Triggerfish and there was a ping pong table, and now I come from live action, I come from advertising, and I sit down, and the first day 1:00 hits, everybody gets up and goes for lunch. And I think there's like a fire drill or something. I'm like, what? And they take lunch for an hour and play ping pong and skateboard. And I'm like, what is happening? And this is encouraged. And then I hired a PM who came from live action and advertising. And her first day as well, she's like, is it a fire drill? Where's everybody going? What's happening? I'm like, no, they take lunch here. It's a thing. This is, and I also came in wanting to, one of the big things is we lead with a carrot, not with a stick, which is quite different to live action as well. And giving this sort of room for the creativity. And I always felt like I was this bleeding heart in live action going, please, can we send editors home? They haven't seen their family in 2 weeks, and maybe we should feed them because they're living off like corners, and And everyone was like, bleeding hearts. And then I came into animation, and suddenly I felt like this hard ass who was like, I'm sorry your goldfish died, but you can't have a week off, And there was just totally different vibe. And I Stuart had conversations with me a lot of because I said to him, we're running our interns who come and work at Triggerfish and then think that this is how companies that we care this much. They're never going to be able to work for the psychopaths that I've worked for. It was this mind shift for me of we're doing this. We're not just doing this because we're nice people. I mean, we're lovely people and we do care about our teams. But we do it because we need you to be happy to get work done, to all of us to do our jobs. And I was noticing that while we were all talking, that we all sound like we're basically life coaches of, caring so on our soft skills and how do we communicate, how do we get this person to communicate with us? And I was that's our job. And it's because we work with creatives. It's our job to do those things.
Yeah, I think the parallel that you were drawing of so we're in the creative space, we're all working with creatives, but my creatives that I work with, they can put their headphones on, they can watch YouTube videos while they work, they can listen to music. I can't, because I need to be hearing what is happening in the studio. I'm talking to 4 people at the same time. It's strange you kind of run just parallel to this creative working environment, but you get to work with them, which is great. And you are you're the one that's oh, are you happy? Are you good? Do you have everything you need? But then you're also the one when am I getting my stuff? When are you delivering?
You cannot underestimate the creativity that goes into a good spreadsheet, though. We are creative.
And
you
color
should
coding.
see some of our spreadsheets.
I count myself incredibly privileged that I'm someone who comes from a career background where I did, for a very brief moment, function as a creative in a creative role. And I try and remind myself of that. I try and remind myself of what that felt like, what it felt like to produce content. Oh, wait, no, I'm not going to use the word produce in this context. Create on demand. And it's bloody difficult. That is, we're touching on a really big topic that everyone's trying to understand. How does business and creativity intersect? And how do we do it in a fashion that's humane, but also superbly productive? That's what we're trying to do. And I think I try and remind myself through a lens of empathy what that feels like, and I still, as a relatively creative person, try and spend a lot of my personal time engaging in creative activities, and I'm often quite surprised by my own strange set of expectations I impose on myself in that. And to be honest, again, the privilege of having a smaller team, this is a conversation we have every 6 months. On a management level, we go, cool, what do we think we can do better as a team where we're trying to hit all these marks? And obviously, you can't always win at all 3. You won't win happiness, on innovation, and perhaps cost. Simultaneously, you won't. It's sliding scales. But I think as teams, we have to be mindful of that, if anything. And listen. It's down to listening. As much as we can say, hey, why is your work not on time? Or, hey, we've got a deadline creeping. Artists can also say, well, you know what? This is how I feel when I'm practicing this. This is my need as an artist. And sometimes they push back, and sometimes we've got to listen. Especially in development phase, which is painful, I know, for us, for our personality types. Development phase can be very stressful. I'm currently in that situation, but it is also, I think, I base this on a talk we listened to by Heidi. Yes, Heidi Mason Munson. Anyway, my apologies. Fabulous producer. She made a really good point. In development, to make a change or a drastic creative shift in development will be your most cost-efficient place in your entire production to do it. And as producers, that hits deep. Yeah. Sorry, I'm rambling.
Well, I just want to ask one more question, then I'll open it up to the audience. Unless Kai, I didn't mean to cut you off. Do you have something to add to that?
I was just going to say, I learned about myself. I do not thrive in pre-production and development. I need practice, but it's too much for me because there's too much pivoting. I want them to make a decision, and then I will make that decision happen. Not like we could choose 6 of these different. I really do struggle with pre-production and development.
So before I open it up, so one of the other things that can be really difficult for women in the workforce is how to navigate their own compensation and when on some of the online asynchronous programming, I was talking to Marcia Gwendolyn Jones, who's a feature film animation producer and also one of my mentors, and she puts it up front when she goes to work for a studio that one of the first things she looks for is compensation. So it's controversial for women to often navigate and negotiate their own salaries. So do you have any tips for younger folks coming up on how to do that and feel comfortable with doing it?
I think it's difficult for females being in the positions that we're in because unfortunately the salary scales are set up on a very male dominant kind of scale. So we don't have much to compare to. So I would say maybe do research, find like where you feel you fit or where you want to get to, and then if you have to compromise on your remuneration when you start, make sure that you have a plan in place to get to where you want to go with clear milestones that can be reevaluated as you go.
The sort of like goodwill feminist in me wants to answer this question, but the psychopathic producer doesn't, because if everybody starts asking for fair wages, I think my budgets are going to blow up, which is a pretty appalling thing to say. And I have found you are 100% right. I have found that men in the industry, because I'm a producer, I decide on how much people get paid, and we have internships. And the men much more comfortable asking for raises, putting a price, and women kind of just take what they're offered, or they come in a lot, and that's immediately you see the pay scale. I'm not like, I'm going to say, how much do you want to earn? And I'm going to pay you how much you want to earn, but women ask for much less than men. And I think for myself, as you become a producer, you get more oversight of what people pay, and you realize how underpaid you are, and then that becomes a thing. But my best advice is talk to other people. Stop making it the secret of how much money you earn. Talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues. I mean, I know a lot of contracts say you can't, but once again, the producer me is going to try and calm down. Talk, find out, because you may turn around to your boyfriend and find out he's earning triple what you're earning, and you didn't even think that somebody could earn that amount of money. I mean, took me a long time to realize how underpaid I was, and what I did for a while is every new job I got, when they asked me what I wanted, I just doubled my previous salary. And I remember going, when is somebody going to be like, this is outrageous? Because that's how underpaid I was being, that I could go through quite a lot of jobs doubling my salary. And people were like, yeah, and that tracks. Yeah.
I think some of the best, to answer the fundamental question, how can we improve as women in the industry? Some of the best financial advice and guidance in this exact area I've gotten from men, because men get it right.
Because they're being paid, and so you say, how much are you earning?
Yeah. So I mean, by all means, I'm I totally agree. You have to talk with other people who have gone through this. I specifically, in this specific area, choose to learn from men, because men have been doing this, I think, quite well for decades. And then, obviously, if you are privileged enough to have a mentor, this is definitely a topic to soundboard with your mentor. Payment, and how much should I be earning? And I think the other part of this, again, sorry, dwelling into the soft skill side of things, but know your value. Obviously, the more experienced you become in your specific field, the more you will learn about how to assess your own value within a team, or perhaps within the future of a team. There are many ways to think about it. But I agree with everyone else. Definitely speak to people, even if it's to a parent, but speak to someone who's more experienced in this area than you are. I also want to just tip of the hat to the younger generation. I believe they're Gen Z, who has now started entering the workforce. I find the Gen Z guys and girls to be much more eloquent and confident on this topic than we were. And I applaud you for that.
So I find it very interesting, because is that a South African thing, that we just don't talk about salaries? Like, nobody talks about work? I mean, why? How are you supposed to know what you should be expecting to earn if not even your parents would talk to you about what they earned? You don't.
Because then you can't get exploited. And capitalism lies on that.
Entertainment strike in the United States because of this. So
No, like if you...
no,
if-
so it's
if-
global. I mean, I'm sure there's some cultures where it is not, but we don't talk about our salaries. And even I would say there is at least being a trend, as someone who hires and who has my own company now, that we're posting our salary ranges. And that used to not be a part of it. And I was always like, I don't want to waste anyone's time. Like, I'm going to post the salary range, because if it's not in the range that you want to make, and this is all we can afford, like, that just should cut out, people who you might love but you can't afford, or people who are like, that's not what I can make. So, but that has only started in the past year, like just posting a salary range for a job.
I think that there's this sort of like, without sounding like a socialist conspiracy theory, it's considered uncouth to talk about money. It's considered trashy to talk about how much you earn. That's, and I'm sure that comes from if we don't know what other people are earning, it's much easier to be exploited. It's much easier to be underpaid. It's much easier and that's why the advice is talk to people. And I loved what you said about know your worth. That is the other thing that I notice, the difference between men and the emails that I get asking for a raise from men are, hi, I've taken on this much more responsibility. I feel that I have this experience, I deserve this pay raise. Woman is like, I'm so sorry, would you mind terribly? This like, as if I'm doing them a favor. Or they overcompensate and they're like, give me more money. And then you're also like, huh? What? And so it's also about learning how to have conversations about money.
Great. All right, audience. I think we have a few minutes. Does anybody have any questions they want to add? How many minutes do we have? We have 15 minutes. We have lots of minutes. Yes.
You guys are talking about money, of salaries and stuff, but for me, what's always quite an interesting challenge is quoting as a business, because in order to value your business, to offer your employees fair and reasonable pay, the business needs to earn fair and reasonable pay. And I would just love an experience share from all three of you, I guess in varying degrees of how you go about quoting jobs in order to give fair and reasonable pay to your animators, staff, employees, all that sort of stuff. What are the challenges and that you go through with quoting, whether it's a service job or however it is? I don't know how it is that you quote.
So for us, it works with, on the ad side or commission work, is that we will take our costs and then work back from that. Like, what is it going to cost the studio based on what people are earning in the studio at the moment? And then we quote based on that. If the quote comes back and it's lower, it's okay. Less resources, then you have to get more creative with it. And then with our feature film, it was the other way around, where we received a budget and then we had to adjust very drastically to that budget and get very creative. So in terms of where we find stuff, how we structure things, how we run our approvals, like how much we actually put on the animators, all of that had to be scaled according to what we could actually pay them. And then also realizing if it is like a lower rate, what you can actually expect from someone. But then also, like, they say you can have 3 things. You can have good, fast, and cheap, right? But you can only have 2. You can only have 2. But everybody's always pushing for 3. So yeah, trying to balance that. And it's difficult to put that back to client, though, because they'll come at you with a very low budget, but still want good. So I think it's just, yeah, just kind of managing that. Yeah.
It's a really good question, and like I said, you need to talk to your friends about your salaries. Like as studios, can we please start talking to each other, because I think that
Yes,
would help.
please.
I often, you know, when you're bidding against studios, or I see other people's studios, and I'm just like, how are you? You know, how are you doing this? How are you making this work? How are you taking on, you know, this project that we said no to, and you've said yes to the budget? How? You know, what am I missing? What trick am I missing? I really liked what Ross and Lesego were saying in the previous talk, which was know how much you need to get it done. Like, know how much to pay a person that you know, pay a person a decent wage and get a decent wage for yourself. And then you draw that line there. So you know where and you go in higher, but you know what the minimum is, and you know when you're being undercut. And you know when it stops making financial sense. I think what has been a difficult thing, and I think that we're experiencing this in the South African industry hugely at the moment, is people came here because we were cheap. And we produced excellent work because we wanted to prove that we could. But we did it, we over-delivered on the budget because we wanted to prove this is our industry, we can do this, we can deliver world-class work. Now we're getting the expectation of these low budgets. We're trying to up the budgets. They're like, well, if you're going to charge this much, then I can just go to Europe. And there's the sense of we must come in really cheap. And then for sure you get like really cheap. You can go to Indonesia and China, and it's sweatshops, and there's not a lot of love that's going into it. And I'm sure those people aren't getting paid a lot of money. And I find the South African industry, we're trying to do more artisanal, more bespoke, more world-class work, but we're getting these like really bad budgets still because we took on a couple of bad budgets to prove ourselves. And now there's that mind shift of, yes, we're South African, and we need to increase the budgets and come to us because we give creatively we have something to give that isn't just cheap. And that's why you shouldn't go to Europe.
I'll be brief. I just want to add to it. I think I totally agree with Kaydee and Kaya. I just want to add to it that assuming that you either are a business owner or an artist. Business owner, all right. Well, with that in mind, everything we just said definitely also depends on where you are in your business life cycle. The studio I work for is vastly different to the studio that Kaya represents. It's vastly different to the studio that Kaydee represents. And we're all in different life cycles of fundamentally the business, right? And I find most clients, especially if it is clients that are local and they sort of get to know the different studios, they also know how to spend their money and where to spend the money for what. We shouldn't underestimate people's knowledge of what certain studios are capable of or what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. But in terms of how it's costed, to answer your question, it definitely hinges largely on where your business is at. If you're a 5-man team, your cost estimate's going to look vastly different to the cost estimate I might generate based on the fact that we have 15 people with, different areas of expertise, but also your infrastructure. Our infrastructure is quite expensive. I think your infrastructure is very expensive, as an example. And it just depends where you are in your life cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to that, like also factor in your overhead costs. So, we all like forget about that. I mean, in the States, we're in a little bit of a different line items because we also have to cover our benefits for our employees. And so I always just blanket add 25% to whatever the budget is to make sure to cover the overhead as well. Anybody else? Or next?
Hi guys, thanks for doing this talk. It's kind of often a case where people start a studio with a director and a producer. Like the producer is either explicitly or implicitly the partner in that business. And you guys all sort of fall in different scales as the producers at your company, I imagine, where it's like you're either part of the partnership or not. But how did you find your studio? How did you find your place and sort of decide to throw your energies behind that specific enterprise?
So initially, I started with my husband, Andre, who's an animation director, and he has his own freelance company, Feral Animation. So we were working together, and we got a job, and Polycat had just released their Eosis trailer, which was amazing. And when we met with the clients for that project, Tulips and Chimneys, we recognized that Polycat was the company that we wanted to partner with on that project. So we worked together, and from that experience, just before the project wrapped, I had a chat with Gotti and Lloyd of Polycat, and they asked me to stay on as their producer because they felt that the working relationship had worked out so well. And yeah, 2 years later, we're still very happily working together, and yep, that's kind of how I found it.
It took me a while. Producers are often freelancers, and we will move between studios, and we don't have a huge amount of loyalty. And if you struggle to find the studio that you gel with, I think you start your own studio, like Esther and Kia and everybody in the panel yesterday was talking about. And I was reflecting on that. So, I've never really had a complete desire to start my own studio. And is that because I'm terrified? Yeah. But I found Triggerfish, so I've worked for lots of different people, moved between lots of different companies, and I've been at Triggerfish for the longest that I've ever worked at a company, and I am much more invested in it because it's a company that I can get behind. I don't feel like I'm working for sociopaths. We're making cool content. I believe in the ethos, so now I'm committed to, like, I've got skin in the game. I want this company, and I want to be a part of this company. And so I think I was lucky enough that I found a company that aligned with what I wanted. Otherwise, I would have either become a freelance, I would have stayed being a freelancer and eventually gotten a gatful and started my own studio.
The studio I'm currently with is a young studio. I think the studio's only been around for something like seven or 8 years. I used to freelance, so I bounced around a lot. And when the two founders of Lucan, started their shop, I helped them out, like here and there, with some things because we know each other personally. And then, oh man, I burnt my fingers after a long contract. I was so burnt out. And at that point, the guys at Lucan also had a nice project coming in, and they had parted ways with another producer, and it was supposed to be a contract gig, and now for me it's 6 years later, and I'm incredibly grateful for the freedom and flexibility that they've allowed me to, I think, imprint on their business. That's something that's kept me around. I see that as a massive benefit. That's been lovely, yeah.
I can answer as well. So the company that I founded, I orchestrated a merger with that company, so it's now part of a much larger organization in the United States. And I founded it because I don't like working for other people. So now I'm like sort of now working for other people within like my consulting role for that. And then the project, the company I produce for in Canada, it's just because I am just so madly in love with Jerica Cleland, the creative director of that organization, that I'll follow her to the ends of the earth. So I'm at this point in my career, I'm like, I have to be really passionate about the person. I'm frankly less interested in the project because I feel like we spend so much time with these people that, and I want them, you know, and there's just a lot of, maybe more so in the States than here, but just a lot of shady people, and so I just don't have time for that. So, you know, it's really just, I will take a great human over anything else.
Especially in animation, because it's so, you work together. That's why everybody said ISO, because you're not working together for a week, you're working together for like years. It was, yeah. But I want to just, sorry, I just want to correct the misconception that producers are always partners, and I think maybe because we're in control a lot of the time, it seems like we're calling the shots. But it is quite rare that your production manager or your line producer or the person who is actually calling the shots on the floor has any stake in actually the organization that they work in. A lot of the time we're dealing with budgets and processes that we don't have control over. And it's, yeah, part of stakeholder management.
I don't want to start again.
So, as a young person, previously I took on a job thinking I knew my work and how much value it was gonna cost, but you know, I overestimated with like life. So I was just thinking, how do you know your work, and what kind of value would you put on it?
I mean, that's what experience gives you, right? So, you know, I definitely would never encourage anyone to work for free, but if you are younger in your career and you know, like you make that sort of, you have that opportunity for growth, not a mistake, but that you undervalued or got charged too little for what you're worth, then you learn for the next time. But that also can be the challenge when someone's expecting your budget to become at one level, and you have to be honest with them of like, this is why it's not costing that anymore. It actually costs me money.
Yeah, I think you need to find, it comes down to communication, again, doing research, finding out what are freelancers charging, speak to other people that are freelancing in the same role that you are, and then another way to do it would be, how long do you estimate this is going to take you in a reasonable amount of time? You can't take 2 months to do something that would take someone else a week. Work that out reasonably, and then put a cost to that. What do you need to earn for that amount of time?
And I suppose also we'll never encourage anybody to work for free, but realize when you're sort of paying school fees. So sometimes you will charge less for a job because you know you're not experienced and you're proving yourself, and it's going to take you 2 months instead of a week, and you're going to charge a little, you know, like, and then the next job you can charge a little more because you've got a little more experience. And it's, I think, knowing that, like as I said, you can die of exposure. Don't let yourself get paid in exposure all the time, but also know when you're paying school fees.
Well, and to add to that, I mean, I can just give you a current example. I mean, especially for the producers in the room, you know, for the project that we're working on, we brought in someone who was younger because they were less expensive, but they are slow, and it's going to cost us by not having put the money into that at that time. So if you are younger and starting in your career, you just also have to recognize that unless you're I mean, there are amazing people out there. You're probably not going to be as fast as someone who's been doing this for a really long time. And so as producers, when you might look at someone who might be less expensive with less experience, it will cost you. Thank you guys so much for participating in this. And hopefully, if you guys have additional questions, you guys can be around for a little while.